7:02. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Marianne Ruan, the president of the Association of Philadelphia Tour Guides, and I'm really pleased that all of you have joined us here tonight for our webinar on the 1776 Trailblazer. And I'm not even going to say his name because part of the intrigue of tonight's meeting is learning whether or not it is actually Anthony Benezet or Benezet. So we have Vance Lehmkuhl here. He is the director of the American Vegan Center, which is a corporate member of APT. Vance has been with us a number of years now. So let's give him a nice virtual welcome. And I will turn it over to you, Vance.
Hello, I'm going to share my screen. Now, I think, there we go. Hopefully you can see that. As Marianne mentioned, I'm the director of the American Vegan Center and an APT, longtime APT member. I really appreciate the Association of Philadelphia Tour Guides for hosting this opportunity to talk about Benezet's role in the events leading up to 1776. I just want to mention I am a tour guide at the American Vegan Center. I do a standard 90-minute tour. That's our main tour, looking at Philadelphia as the place where the U.S. vegetarian movement started, where the U.S. Modern vegan movement was sparked. And we have that every Saturday and Sunday. If people haven't tried it out, come out and give it a try. And I also have developed a tour specific to Benezet that is delivered in French. And picking up on what Marianne said, it's the historical documents make it pretty clear that people in Philadelphia, the English-speaking people, thought of him as Anthony Benezet. Some people said Benezet, but his name was Benezet. He was born in France. He was a refugee from France, and his main biographer, Maurice Jackson, calls him Benezet, so I'm calling him Benezet. So live with it. The concept of this talk is Benezet 1776 Trailblazer. We're just going to be looking at this one. Well, we'll look at several aspects, but we got to leave out a lot of stuff about Benezet. I'm just going to mention there's more about Benezet in my book, Revolutionary Peace. It doesn't necessarily go into everything we're going to talk about here, but it has a chapter on Benezet, a chapter on various different veg pioneers that made Philadelphia ground zero for the U.S. vegetarian movement for more than a century. But let's get going on the Benezet thing. The first question is Bene who? And right here, this is a picture that I've drawn of Benezet. This is my kind of best guess at if you were going to caricature this 18th century person, what he might look like, since nobody knows what he looked like. He refused to sit for a portrait, and he said his face was too ugly to go be passed down to history. This is a famous woodcut that is slightly altered. Um, that it was created 50 years after Benezet died by somebody who never saw him. So what his concept of what Benezet looked like is irrelevant. So that's why I put a paper bag on his head. But yes, Benezet is largely an unknown quantity for most Americans and even most Philadelphia tour guides. So one of my hopes is that I'm presenting some information that I think would be germane to a lot of different tours, but you all can be the judge of that. And one of the things that we're going to do is try to just get to know Benezet in the course of seeing what he was doing that wound up leading to 1776. This is just a very quick overview of his life. I'm not going to read through each line of this, but I will just mention the highlights that he moved to Philadelphia with his family. As I said, he was a refugee from France. They were Huguenots. They were forced out by the Catholic government, and they joined the Quakers either just before leaving London or just before or just after arriving in Philadelphia. And it seemed like it may very well be that they intentionally came to Philadelphia to join the Quakers or vice versa. Most Huguenots who wound up leaving Europe and going across the ocean to North America tended to either go to New England or South Carolina. But there were some in Philadelphia. Benezet also opened the first school for girls in North America, and he started the organization that became the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, which we'll go into later. So Benezet, if you have are coming into this completely fresh, he was an abolitionist. He was really, as his biographer calls him, the father of the transatlantic abolition movement. And he was very passionate about trying to persuade people, and he was very good at persuading people through the written word, which was his main medium. He wrote a lot of letters. He wrote letters to heads of state, anybody who, excuse me, he thought could get their hands on the levers of power to stop slavery. But these are some of the major written works of his. These are books, except for the first one. The first one is the Epistle of 1754, which was an essay or a letter that was issued by Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. This is the first real official Quaker body taking a stand against slavery. And Benezet essentially made that happen. He proposed this. He shepherded it through the committee, and he served on the committee that he wrote the first draft and then served on the committee that edited the final version. I'm going to point to the one with the biggest letters is some historical account of Guinea. That was probably his most important book, and may well be his best book, where he's really honed his persuasive rhetoric to a fine point. Now, a lot of people had written about slavery and how bad slavery was, especially from a Christian perspective. A lot of those works would just go into these, it's a sin against God, and, we're bringing all this terrible stuff on ourselves. Anthony Benezet was definitely a very fervent Christian, and he did bring those elements in, but he also brought in hard data showing what was happening when slave ships went down the coast of Africa and started wars so they could collect prisoners of war to bring across the ocean, as well as showing what these people in their diaries were saying that showed that Africa was not this dark, savage continent that had a lack of business and industry and education, but it was a fully developed culture that we were just going over and pillaging. We were not doing them a favor by bringing them to civilization. So his books really did open a lot of people's eyes to some of the fairy tales they were telling themselves about slavery. And We're going to go to a quote now from Elaine Hornick. I'm just going to point this out once. This is a there you go. This is an unpublished 1974 dissertation that she wrote that has turned out to be a real motherlode of information that's shown up in just about everybody else's books afterward. It was called Anthony Benezet, 18th Century Social Critic, Educator, and Abolitionist. And we will be drawing from this a lot because she really does the most to go into this aspect of Benezet as the Trailblazer of 1776. And here's where she pretty much lays it out and says the anti-slavery movement grew from obscurity to a broadly based popular movement in the decade prior to the revolution. So essentially, over a period of 10 years, it went from being this completely obscure concept to a broad popular movement, due in large part to Benezet's tireless efforts and those of the mostly Quaker lieutenants he recruited in other colonies. And he did, again, he was constantly writing letters and trying to get people on board, trying to get people to do things. And he did. He had this very gentle manner, but he was also kind of relentless about it. And he did have different lieutenants in different parts of the country, but he also had some in Philadelphia. And one lieutenant was Benjamin Rush. I'm hoping that most of the people here are familiar with Benjamin Rush, Dr. Benjamin Rush, the most famous doctor of the Revolutionary era, who did wind up signing the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Rush, Benezet would talk to him about abolition, and Rush would be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with you, but I can't like speak out right now because I'm of my prominent position. And Benezet finally prevailed on Rush to write this little pamphlet that would come out right as the delegates, sorry, the assembly was looking to vote on this concept of doubling the import tax, the duty on importing enslaved people, and doubling that tax would just make it prohibitively expensive to import the enslaved. So it would effectively end Pennsylvania slave imports, which it basically did up and through the Revolution. But Rush did write this at the behest of Benezet, an address to the inhabitants of the British settlements in America. British settlements in America upon slave keeping. I don't know why that lost its italics halfway through. But Rush did publish that anonymously, and as he did with a couple of other people, Benezet wound up ticking him off by making these comments publicly that made it clear that it was Rush who had written this. And Benezet, of course, patting him on the back and saying, "Great job." But Rush, like, ixnay, ixnay, ixnay. But Rush did write the thing because he did feel that times had changed and it was now becoming easier to take this position. In fact, at almost the same time, he said, this is a pretty famous quote from Rush, Anthony Benezet stood alone a few years ago in opposing Negro slavery in Philadelphia, and now three-fourths of the province, as well as the city, cry out against it. Which, of course, being Rush, he loved to be uh, poetic and somewhat hyperbolic in his rhetoric. So that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but Benezet wasn't completely alone, but he did do more than anybody to really get this to be a huge issue that was persuading a lot of people. So I'm just trying to establish right here that the concept of slavery being a bad thing and something that we should do something about and something we should try not to have anything to do with had by the early 1770s become a broad-based popular concept. Just dialing back a couple years, this is the petition in Virginia where Benezet started writing letters to everybody he knew in Virginia, as well as sending books to important people. Anyone who was a mover or a shaker, he would send a book, and intensified this whole campaign to get popular interest in a petition to the king against the slave trade. Finally, the House of Burgesses in 1772 voted to petition the king for an end to the slave trade, and the king did give that a negative, and that became one of a laundry list of grievances that the colonists complained about the king and Great Britain, and that was kind of part of their scheme in going along with Benezet's concept. But Ben Franklin, as well as some other people, attributed the popularity of the Virginia movement to abolish the trade and the passage of the petition to the writings of Benezet. So that's just giving you some sense of the general feeling in the country and something that the patriots in trying to bring us to the point of independence and revolution would latch on to. But also, just looking at the Declaration, particularly where we say, Thomas Jefferson was bringing this concept of natural law and natural rights, which were just within the 1770s becoming popular topics to talk about. Benezet was one of the people who really got that conversation going. Again, Hornick says anti-slavery played a significant role in popularizing natural rights theory in the colonies rather than vice versa. And one example of this is in 1762, Benezet's, his second book really, but his first real quality effort, let's say, a short account of that part of Africa inhabited by Negroes. This shows some of the stuff that he was doing, showing you what was going on over there in Africa by using the actual words of ship captains so that people couldn't say, well, they're just, looking at it through rose-colored glasses, but also bringing in as ideas, bringing in ideas from Scottish Enlightenment philosophers such as George Wallace. And so this one says government was instituted for the good of mankind. Kings, princes, governors are not proprietors of those who are subject to their authority. They have not a right to make them miserable. On the contrary, their authority is vested in them that they may, by the just exercise of it, promote the happiness of their people. So I'm assuming that you're hearing that and hearing some resonance with some of the phrasing that Thomas Jefferson used. And I'm not saying, oh, Thomas Jefferson read this book by Benezet and said, boy, this guy George Wallace really got it going on, and decided to use that. But it is something that Benezet was getting out there in popular books back in 1762. So Jefferson is a very interesting character. We're going to look at some of the founding fathers in relation to Benezet and in relation to this movement that he started. And Jefferson, as we know, had a very prominent attachment to slavery in that he had I'm not even going to use air quotes for mistress. People historically, we've said mistress. He had a woman, Sally Hemings, that he took as his lover, even though she was enslaved. And yet he, as a Virginian, he did also get swept up in this general anti-slavery feeling. And in 1773 and 1774, there was this crucial moment where there was a groundswell of anti-slavery feeling, at least in terms of slave imports, that might have somehow been leveraged to get us to the point of starting off the United States of America as a completely slave-free country. Obviously, that didn't happen, but this was at a time when even a lot of the colonies in the South were like, yeah, let's stop slave imports, mostly because they had imported so many enslaved people. They now had a glut, and the prices were, hitting rock bottom. So they wanted to stop the imports so they could kind of recover. But taking advantage of that, the Patriots started, creating this whole independence movement, talking specifically about slavery and how the king, how Great Britain was kind of forcing them to participate in slavery. So Jefferson here, in a summary view of the rights of British America, is saying the abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies. Jefferson there is saying the abolition of slavery, not just the suspending of imports. And so you can imagine there were some probably prominently Southern colonists who were kind of like, well, I don't know about abolition, but sure, go ahead and do that now and we'll fix it later. Meanwhile, going forward to 1776, Thomas Jefferson is writing the first draft of the Declaration of Independence and goes into great detail about things that are so bad about slavery itself, captivating and carrying men into slavery and into another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither, and determined to keep open a market where men can be bought and sold. So he's really talking about, there's just so many aspects of this that are so terrible. And by that time, a lot of the Southern delegates were like, all right, well, now we're getting close to the point where, this could be actionable. So they insisted on that being taken out. So that was not in the final version of the Declaration of Independence. In Benezet's opinion, this whole drive for independence from Britain was a little bit of a distraction. He really felt, and looking back on it, he may well have been right that the abolition of Negro slavery should have taken precedence over any attempt by white people to seek colonial independence. It's I constantly playing this what if game. Like, what if people had listened to him and actually made that a priority? They may not have been able to do it through a war, and wouldn't have a glorious Revolutionary War that was, we're celebrating in many ways now. But meanwhile, the Patriots part of the independence movement started pushing further to make it's not just that they're forcing us to enslave other people, they're enslaving us. So the imagery of white Americans being systematically reduced to a state of slavery by the British became a popular kind of talking point for these people. So here we have Thomas Paine, who is known for his eloquence and rhetoric and wit and so forth, and he quipped that we, white colonists, have enslaved multitudes and now are threatened with the same. So, it's a nice aphorism, a nice, very compact turn of words, but it does require him actually saying threatened with the same, which means that, our having to be taxed without representation is the same as somebody having their entire life stolen as they're kidnapped from their homeland and brought somewhere where they have to work their entire life and can be killed or disposed of by somebody who pretends to own them. That's really not the same thing. And, saying it's the same, you can say, well, he was speaking poetically. But he did actually say later on that what John Dickinson is saying in this next quote. Paine also said explicitly that those who are taxed without their own consent, expressed by themselves or their representatives, are slaves. So the Patriots saw how popular, this concept of hating on slavery was, and they decided to push it as far as they could, in my opinion, kind of problematically misappropriating the legitimate, real suffering of all of these Africans who were living with actual slavery and kind of using the term more poetically to try to make themselves into victims that would help everybody feel like, oh man, we got to fight back. One of the interesting characters is John Jay, the slave keeping abolitionist. I call him that because he was one of the most eloquent speakers about abolition, and he was also somebody who remained an enslaver up to his death. But he did note, right after the war was over, he noted to contend for our own liberty and to deny that blessing to others involves an inconsistency not to be excused. So he didn't excuse himself for being part of this inconsistency, but he did just keep on going ahead and do it. And he was like, well, I guess I'm not excused. I'm not sure exactly what he was thinking, but the poster child for this whole phenomenon is Patrick Henry. So, obviously known for Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. He was an enslaver himself and was not willing to give liberty to those that he was holding in bondage. And somebody gave him, it may have been Benezet himself who gave him a copy of some historical account of Guinea. Again, that book that had a powerful influence on a lot of people. And Patrick Henry read the book and wrote to somebody else, I agree with everything Benezet says in that book. And you wouldn't think to hear me say that you'd be talking to a slave keeper, but I am drawn along by the general inconvenience of living without them. I cannot justify it. So again, Patrick Henry stepping up to denounce himself as a hypocrite, but not actually stepping up to change his behavior to stop being a hypocrite. So eventually, all of this stuff about petitioning the king, trying to get imports stopped here and there, trying to get this to happen with slavery, trying to get that to happen. It was a great gambit by the Patriots using Benezet and his writings and his popular movement to increase the animosity between the colonists and the king and Great Britain in general. So Benezet himself finally realized fully the end for which the anti-slavery campaign was being used. It was almost indistinguishable from advocacy of revolution, and he could no longer ignore that fact. Obviously, as a Quaker, Benezet was not a big fan of the concept of revolution. He really felt that what we had was a political dispute, a dispute, as he called it, over where you pay your taxes. That should not be foregrounded when we have this very, very palpable, real evil happening that needs to be ended. but he saw that his efforts to try to get the latter to happen were just being used for the former, so he kind of withdrew from a lot of his public campaigning at that point, just as we were really getting the war started getting underway. In 1774, Benezet started an organization that would become the Pennsylvania Abolition Society after the war. But this was the Society for the Relief of Free Negroes unlawfully held in bondage. And this is Philadelphia had the largest free African community and population in all the colonies. And you would sometimes have situations where slave catchers, slave hunters would come into Philadelphia, snatch a free black person, and they would be held in bondage, ready to be sold down the river. Benezet organized this whole society so that people could go get them legal help, get them out of that situation, and that evolved into if now an enslaved person ran away, escaped, he felt that they should be free, so they started harboring runaway slaves and helping runaway slaves, runaway enslaved people. And so that grew into the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, which had many far-reaching effects, most of them after Benezet died. I will point out that our quipster Thomas Paine did wind up joining the Pennsylvania Abolition Society and becoming a prominent abolitionist. Ben Franklin, who was a longtime friend of Benezet, they lived just right around the corner from each other and were constantly writing to each other when Franklin was overseas. And Benezet was constantly talking to him about abolition, while Franklin was most of the time that he lived in Philadelphia an enslaver. But at the end of his life, he stopped being an enslaver. He became an abolitionist and actually became president of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. So the Pennsylvania Abolition Society was popular with some of our founding fathers, but not all of them. So George Washington comes in here, and it may not surprise you to hear that George Washington did not have quite the same rosy view of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. He felt that because of this organization, slaves who are happy and content to remain with their present masters are tampered with and seduced to leave them. So Washington was apparently living in this world where he was such a great slave master that all the people that he had enslaved just loved him and wanted to stay with him. And, the PA Abolition Society would come in and put all these dangerous ideas into their heads and make them unhappy, which we can pretty much guess, if only from the Ona Judge story, that that was not the case for most, if not all, of his enslaved people or all enslaved people. When you're enslaved, what you want most of all is to not be enslaved. And Washington somehow was either unable to see that or unable to admit it. But anyway, we're going to look now at some of the context in which Benezet's slave anti-slavery advocacy arose, and we got to look at the Quakers and how they looked at certain things. One of the real salient elements of this is the prophet Isaiah, who in chapter 11, verse 6, that's where he talks about the peaceable kingdom, which we're going to have when everything gets back right with the world, and the lion will lie down with the lamb. In the original, it's wolf with the lamb, but we say now lion will lie with the lamb, mostly because of Edward Hicks, the painter. Edward Hicks painted this painting, Peaceable Kingdom, more than 60 times. He didn't, you couldn't just make copies of things. He actually hand painted copies of this painting, not doing it exactly the same way each time, but calling it Peaceable Kingdom each time and having the same general composition showing all the animals getting along with each other. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them, including this one that we have here, has over in the background of the painting, over to the left, it has William Penn making his treaty with the Indians to make the point that it was the establishment of Pennsylvania that Hicks and some other Quakers felt was going to bring us into this concept of getting back into God's grace. And there were many of them that really took this seriously. And one person who had that same outlook was Benjamin Lay. I don't have time to go into Benjamin Lay's whole story, but he's a phenomenally important person. Also, he was a profound influence on Anthony Benezet. They became friends, and Anthony Benezet picked up and continued Benjamin Lay's crusade. Benjamin Lay was most concerned with the fact that the Quakers, in particular, this religion that was founded in peace and nonviolence, were being run in so many places, including Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, by these rich Quakers who were slave keepers. And that just did not make any sense to him. So he was doing these different stunts. I'm not even going to explain this stunt. It's in Marcus Rediker's The Fearless Benjamin Lay. But he started doing this and got the attention of some younger Quakers, even as the older Quakers said, oh, he's just too crazy and crotchety, and they would dismiss him. But people like Anthony Benezet, John Woolman, John Churchman, and Joshua Evans actually were paying attention. They picked up that crusade and ran with it. So in 1754, as I mentioned before, the Epistle of 1754 came out. That was an important year also because in the Board of Overseers of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, the big organization that ran all the smaller meetings, they had a couple of old Quakers who had just died, and those Quakers were very much attached to the status quo and not wanting to change anything and not wanting to look at abolition as something that they needed to consider. So they died, and Benezet, who had already been on the Board of Overseers, now rose to a more prominent position there. And at that point, he and Woolman apparently agreed that it was time for Woolman to submit his book Considerations on the Keeping of Negroes to the board to get them to approve it, which they did now, which they wouldn't have with these other Quakers on the board. But at the same time, Benezet, well, not at the same time, it was several months later, Benezet proposed that Philadelphia Yearly Meeting make this statement warning Quakers away from slavery. He wrote the first draft, and it was edited and published by Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. Benezet, as I mentioned, was on that committee. So if he had just done that, really gotten the first thing that would move the Quakers to actually start taking a stand, that would be great. But of course, this epistle was more of an opinion piece. It wasn't a rule change. It didn't have any teeth. They actually, excuse me, took another step in 1758 to say now Quakers who are involved in the actual buying and selling of people, that can be an infraction that leads to disownment. So Benjamin Lay was still alive at that point. Someone went to his cave to tell him that the Quakers had gotten to that point, and he said, "God be praised, now I can die in peace." And a few months later, he did. But the crusade did not die, and eventually the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting made this rule change, saying that now, from this point forward, if you're a Quaker, you can't be a slave keeper. If you're a slave keeper, you can't be a Quaker. So if you're a Quaker slave keeper who has enslaved people, you got to let them go starting right now. And the right now that was happening, why, that was in 1776, which is the dual meaning of the title of this talk. Benezet really blazed a trail toward this 1776, as well as the other. Just going a little beyond 1776 to 1780, Benezet was also instrumental in getting Pennsylvania to be the first state to outlaw slavery, to abolish slavery. The trick there is that Vermont had never allowed slavery in the first place, so they didn't need to abolish it. But many other states did, and many other states followed Pennsylvania's example by instituting laws to abolish slavery. And this is known as the gradual abolition law, which is one of many problems that the law has. Obviously, Benezet was not permitted to write this law, But one of the things that people mention is that it did not manumit people right away. They had to wait in some cases 28 years. So that was one problem with it. There was another problem was the fugitive slave provision saying, Pennsylvania is a free state now, but if you bring your enslaved person with you, say to Philadelphia, and they get away, that Pennsylvania recognizes that you should have the right and aid. In other words, Pennsylvania will aid you to recapture this person so you can take him back into a life of slavery. And so that's another little problem with that law. As you can imagine, Benezet didn't like that, and he said, "All right, well, they can have that law. I'm not going to obey it." And he actually, uh, he would house escaped enslaved people in his house until they could find a sure, safe place for them to go, and they could be making their way out of the whole area, the whole region where they were in danger. And this, of course, is the very, very beginnings of the concept of what would later become the Underground Railroad some 50 years later. So Benezet, he did all those things. He actually had a worldwide influence, and I'm just very briefly going to mention his impact on Great Britain. He was, in some ways, he was one of the most important factors in Great Britain finally divesting from the slave trade. Because it was that same book, Some Historical Account of Guinea, which at different times, different people read and were radicalized to become abolitionists. So John Wesley read the book. He became an abolitionist as well as a good friend of Benezet. I mean, correspondence-wise, he was in England and Benezet was in America. Granville Sharp read Some Historical Account of Guinea and had not intended to have anything to do with abolitionism, but read it when he was assigned to speak on behalf of an enslaved person in a court case. But he read that and became a very prominent abolitionist, and he helped influence Thomas Clarkson. Thomas Clarkson also read Some Historical Account of Guinea, not at the instigation of Granville Sharp, but before he even met Sharp. Thomas Clarkson was the main researcher who worked with William Wilberforce, the member of Parliament who kept introducing this bill to get Britain out of the slave trade, which kept getting voted down. But as he was standing up and arguing for it, he was, using research that Clarkson had gotten from Benezet's research, and sometimes Wilberforce would actually quote directly from Anthony Benezet, which he may very well have called Anthony Benezet. But finally, they passed that in 1807, and from 1808 onward, Great Britain was not in the slave trade. So this guy that had this massive influence, was able to change so many people's minds and was also able to see things that we now see. Yeah, this is just very obvious to us, but the average person was not able to see outside of that kind of cage that they were in. We're just going to look at a couple of things here as we get down to the end of this talk. I want to mention again the fact that the family had been expelled. They'd been hounded out of France, basically, went to Holland for a few months and then to London for many years, where Anthony Benezet grew up, likely as Benezet. And then they decided to come to Philadelphia. And as I mentioned, that was there's an interesting choice for the Huguenots. But I want to reiterate that William Penn intentionally created Pennsylvania as a holy experiment. He wanted to create this place, this land of diversity, for tolerance of diversity and the ability to dissent without being punished for dissenting. And that's, in my opinion, and again, I will tout my book. One of the reasons why Philadelphia is where the U.S. vegetarian movement started, because vegetarianism is a form of dissent. But certainly that seemed to be attractive to them. So they did settle in Philadelphia, and Benezet spent a lot of time in his writing talking about custom and how it can be kind of this cage that you get in. You can't really see clearly out of it just because you're used to the way things are done by your friends and family, and you kind of get these blinders on. And he points out in this paragraph, which is again from a short account of that part of Africa inhabited by Negroes, that things that we would object to and say, oh, I would never do that if they were just presented to us out of the blue, we go ahead and do them when they are things that we've seen our friends and family do, and we just take it for granted. This is fine because it's convention, it's custom. And in this passage, in a caution and a warning, he actually blames tyrant custom, kind of drawing a correspondence between the tyrant king that a lot of people were complaining about with custom itself is this ruler that makes you do things that you don't want to do. And here, obviously, he's talking specifically about slavery, and that's the context of this, but he's talking more generally, saying injustice may be methodized and established by law, but it will be injustice as much as it was before. And I have to point out here that Benezet felt that the inability to be sensible to the suffering of our fellow creatures puts men below the level of animals. Now, he may have meant by this sentence that individual human beings who are incapable of this compassion, that they were below the level of animals, or he may have just meant that there are so many of us like that that our whole species is below the level of animals. But that was certainly a very, very different take on things than people had according to custom. And Benezet writes to his friend John Smith, Burlington Quaker, in 1757, saying that he's a vegetarian. They didn't have the word vegetarian yet, but he says, I shall scarce ever imbrue my hands in the blood of any creature." This is right after John Smith has said, "We're going to kill a goose for this feast," and Benezet said, "Okay, well, you do that, but I'm not going to be part of that. I'm not going to have any. I'm not going to watch you do it. I'm not going to help you do it." He says, "Having left off eating meat, as abstinence conduces to my health, and made a kind of league of amity and peace with the animal creation, looking upon them as the most grateful as well as the most reasonable part of God's creatures." And he kind of realizes here he's just said that animals are more grateful and more reasonable than human beings. So he wraps up with a little quip, with the exception of some honest Burlington Quakers, and kind of it just softens the blow of what is really a pretty profound statement on behalf of animals. And so Benezet actually expressed these attitudes. He didn't devote the time and attention to his love of animals that he did to trying to abolish human slavery. But he did. There are places where you can see that he is again trying to do his part to change hearts and minds. This is in the Pennsylvania spelling book that he wrote for kids to learn to spell by copying out passages. This is a passage for small children. He has these small children writing "bird and fish can feel pain," which a lot of people are today are like, well, yeah, but a lot of people today are still like, oh, fish don't feel pain, even though now we have a quarter century's worth of peer-reviewed studies proving that fish do feel pain. Benezet didn't have those, but he had eyes. And so in Maurice Jackson, as I mentioned, Maurice Jackson is considered really the top scholar of Benezet studies, and he wrote what's still considered the top biography, "Let This Voice Be Heard." And in that biography, Jackson says Benezet and his wife Joyce went vegetarian because they did not want to eat anything that might be associated with slave labor. And I read that and I thought, did he really mean to put those words in that order? Because that's kind of implying that he saw, the enslavement of animals as, this problem that he needed to opt out of. So I went looking and found this video that Maurice Jackson had done when the book came out, where he does kind of get more explicit on that. He says one should not, paraphrasing Benezet's ideas, one should not take anything that has life in itself. Now, it's a stretch showing that he, Maurice Jackson, does not necessarily believe this, but he's dutifully compelled to report to us what Benezet believed. But he believed that none of God's creatures, and then he starts that sentence over, he believed that using slave labor was wrong, and therefore so was using any of God's creatures. And so it was the using of other sentient beings, other creatures with their own interests that Benezet could see was wrong. And he did later in that same Pennsylvania spelling book, in a section for older children, he really challenges the concept that humans have standing to decide that an animal's life is worth nothing. In this case, it's the killing of a fly that he takes issue with, and basically points out to this, we assume, a child that he's talking to, that, you really don't have standing to make that decision. And he does pull in the Christian aspect by saying that, God created that fly, and you're saying it's not worth anything, yet God could just wipe you out in a second, but God let you live. So how does that make sense? So, long story short, Benezet as an underdog from birth, as a Huguenot, and having experienced persecution like that, he grew up not to be embittered by that, but actually to be more compassionate and be looking for the underdog in various situations and being able to help, and not just to say, oh, that's too bad that's happening, but actually do real things to improve their situation. That include the poor, the enslaved, fugitives from slavery, oppressed free Africans, women and girls. As I mentioned, he started the first girls' school in North America. The indigenous, he was a negotiator. He wasn't actually an official negotiator, but he accompanied negotiators on treaty negotiations with the American Indians in order to advocate for the Indians. He helped religious dissidents. That's a whole other story that we can't go into right now. Political refugees and non-human animals. All these different kinds of persons that are on the underside of an equation where some dominant power is being used in an oppressive way. And so to return last point, to return to the Declaration, the thing that we're now all having a great celebration of 250 years since. It has some beautiful words like all men are created equal, but again, those seem they may have been earnestly meant at the time, but as subsequent events proved, they were actually being used more poetically than literally. And it bears pointing out that further down in the Declaration, Jefferson very literally does refer to the indigenous people as the merciless Indian savages. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Benezet was using words in a very direct way that was not as poetic, but well constructed to make real points and make real change happen. This change didn't happen, but he did speak truth to power at the end of the French and Indian War, writing to Commander-in-Chief to say, hey, now that we've got peace with the Indians, wouldn't it be great if we could, establish trade relationships with them as a sovereign nation, and we could maintain that peace by just staying in the place where we already are, the land that we've already purchased, rather than constantly trying to expand and taking their land. And that was Benezet's revolutionary peace, a kind of peace that was founded on justice, not just, justice in this very great academic sense, but really justice for the underdog. And so Benezet, unlike some of our founding fathers, he did, English wasn't even his first language, but he did study a lot of these documents in English words, and he did take a lot of them literally and make things happen because he was working with them literally, and he was somebody whose life was devoted to trying to achieve liberty and justice for all. And that's the end of today's talk. So how did we do? Went a little over. All right. Well, so yeah, once again, I invite you stop by the American Vegan Center. I hope that we'll have plenty of time for any questions or commentary you may have. But if you don't get to it here, I'll be at the American Vegan Center tomorrow. So stop in and give me give me a taste of what you got going on. But yeah, that's I'm going to stop sharing, and now I'm done. Boom.
Thank you. Let's give them a virtual applause for Vance on Zoom
Thank
here.
you.
I
That's
guess if you guys have questions, if you want to, you can use the raise hand function. Um, I think Connie's waving her hand there. Do you want to ask a question, Connie? Just unmute yourself. Or maybe she's not asking a question. Oh, here she is.
Yeah, I was just applauding too.
Oh, okay.
okay.
Anybody have any questions, comments? I have one. Um, when we're giving tours, Vance,
Yeah.
like say in the old city area, that's what most people do, at least most frequently. What are some locations that you think are good places to, to bring in Anthony Benezet?
Yeah, I should have said, thanks to some enterprising writer, there is a page on Benezet in the APT handbook that does mention several places. And realistically, the richest place is between 3rd and 5th along Chestnut Street because you have Benezet's historical marker right across from Carpenter's Hall. And if you stand there just to the west of the marker and look, I mean, the marker is just to the west of Carpenter's Hall. And then if you're just to the west of the marker, you look down toward Walnut Street, you can see this raised wall, which is defining this space, which was called the Benezet School. Benezet spent 20 years teaching free Africans and apparently sometimes enslaved Africans in his home at night for free, even though during the day he was a schoolmaster as his profession, teaching white kids by day and black kids by night. Finally, in 1770, he convinced the Quakers to build an actual school that would be a free school for African children, and they did, and that's where that is. So that's one interesting thing. I'll just point out that Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and James Forten, who all became pillars of the free black community in Philadelphia in the years around the turn of the 19th century, they all had gone to some version of Benezet School. Forten, studied with Benezet himself at his home. Allen and Jones went to what was called the Benezet School. People called it that. Obviously, the Quakers didn't call it that. But I'm just going to point out that Allen and Jones later formed the Free African Society, which started meeting in Allen's house, but then they got big enough that they needed a larger place to meet in, and they chose that school as where they would meet, where they would have the meetings of the Free African Society. So that's another spot that I think is fun to talk about. But then further on, as you go further west on Chestnut, you get to the little garden there at 5th and Chestnut, right across from Independence Hall, where the signer statue is. And really, basically, either right at the end of that actual space or in what's now a driveway in between that and the Second National Bank is where Benezet did his gardening. He had a garden that the Norris family owned. It was on their property, and they let him have a part of their garden to do his own gardening. And that's certainly relevant because of his, as the Norris has said, as Deborah Norris said, this is where he grew those vegetables that comprise such a huge part of his diet. So that to me is also an interesting spot.
It
I
looks
can
like
go, I can come up with more if you want, but
no, it looks like Brenda has a question. Do you want to
okay.
unmute Brenda?
Brenda is muted. Maybe Brenda thinks
Yeah,
Hi.
maybe. There we
there
go.
you go.
Thank you. That was very good. I really enjoyed this evening. Um, is his home anywhere near the garden? Is it
Yeah, sorry, I should have made that absolutely clear. His historical marker there on Chestnut Street, which is right outside of what's now Budokan, that is where he lived for those 20 years when he was teaching the kids in his home and continued to live for most of the time. So that's, yeah, that is also, that's why the marker's there. So that's, yeah, that's
okay?
where he
And the
lived.
marker again is where? At what street?
Yeah, it's on Chestnut Street, in between Third and Fourth. Wait, yeah, in between Third and Fourth. It's right across from Carpenter's Hall. If you're standing right across Chestnut Street from Carpenter's Hall and you
Okay.
turn to the west, you'll see the marker. The marker's a few feet. It's not directly across, but it's a few feet west of there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Looks like comments and chats are, this was great, excellent, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, again, if people, I thought people might want to, tangle with me more on some of the facts or their interpretation. But if you do, and you don't want to get into a whole knockdown drag out right here, come on down to the American Vegan Center and we'll do it there. Roll around, knocking into the t-shirts and everything. Yeah.
Well, all right,
Okay.
going once, last chance, no questions. All right, well, thank you. Let's give him another virtual thank you to Vance here. Really appreciate
Okay.
it. That was great. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
Well, thank you, Marianne. All right.
Have a good
Thanks.
night.
All right. See ya. See you later, everybody.